At Ecosystems, we spend virtually all of our time trying to understand all of the different ways in which a company might deliver value to its customers, or perhaps put even more accurately, all the different ways in which a company might co-create value for its customers. And that leads me back to some research that we did at CEB a number of years ago, which I think is still incredibly relevant and incredibly powerful today. And as part of that project, what we were really trying to understand is what are all the different dimensions along which an individual stakeholder might perceive value as provided by a supplier, by a company. Now, traditionally, we tend to think of sort of value provided by companies existing across two dimensions, company value and personal value. So you're working with you as a company is good for my company, or working with you as a company is good for me personally. But in studying this question in a whole lot of depth with a lot of research and rigor, what we came to understand is, in fact, there's not two dimensions along which a customer stakeholder might perceive value from a company, but actually three. And we named those three dimensions company value, professional value, and something we ultimately named identity value. Now, the reason why this is interesting and important, well, there's a couple. First of all, is because these three dimensions aren't just something we made up, but actually are statistically derived. And more importantly, as we get into this, I'll tell you, the thing that's especially interesting is they actually operate in a different way. Each of them has sort of a different impact on different things you're trying to accomplish. So what are they? So first of all, company value. Company value is perhaps pretty straightforward. It speaks to the different dimensions of value that accrue to my company. So I perceive in working with you as an organization, I perceive certain dimensions of value to accrue to my organization. So you're good for our profitability. You're good for our productivity. You're good for our expenses, or like you help us reduce expenses as a company. So the value in working with you accrues to our company. Then there's a dimension of value that I perceive as accruing not so much to the company, but to me personally, but speaks to my work. So we call this professional value, right? So this is in working with you as a company, I get better at my job. I get more productive. I become more efficient. So again, it's got a business aspect to it. It's good for the company, but it's specifically good for me in my role at the company. So company value and professional value. Now, the third dimension, again, statistically derived and different than the other two, is super interesting. It also exists at this individual level, but it's really not about my job and the value that I perceive accruing to my ability to get my job done, but it's value that I perceive as accruing to me as an individual human being. Thus, we call it identity value. So in working with you as an organization, it helps me raise my profile in my organization. It helps me gain more respect among my peers. It leads to more recognition of my capabilities across my peer set, or maybe across my company. So these are things that change the way not I think about my work, but they're dimensions of value that change the way I think about myself, and maybe change the way that others perceive me as well. Now, the reason why these three dimensions of value are important, company value, professional value, and identity value, is because, as I mentioned, they operate differently. In fact, in understanding identity value in particular, one of the things that we discovered is of the three dimensions of value, identity value is the only dimension that has a statistically significant impact on your likelihood to advocate for a particular course of action among your peers and colleagues across your organization. So in other words, if I'm asking an individual stakeholder to mobilize on behalf of not just my solution, but on behalf of a course of action that leads to my solution, they're going to need a reason. They're going to need a motivation. And when you look at the motivation that's actually going to create that flywheel effect and set that mobilizer in action to go advocate on either on your behalf or on behalf of an action that leads to you, it turns out that identity value is the only dimension of value that is statistically significantly related to that likelihood, to that kind of motivation. There needs to be a WIFM, or a what's in it for me, for that stakeholder. But that WIFM needs to speak specifically not to how I perceive my company or how I perceive my job, but how I perceive myself. Now, this becomes really incredible because I think for most of us, it's an incredible opportunity, because when we think about how we convey value traditionally, we think about business value, we think about professional value, we think about sort of cost calculators and efficiency and productivity metrics. But how often, particularly in business to business, do we speak to or think about how this value accrues to you and your self-perceptions? Now, more on identity value in future episodes, but for now, I think it's a really powerful way to think about the broader spectrum of ways that we can connect to our customers and create that motion of consensus creation, or at least set that motion of consensus creation in action by thinking about tapping into our stakeholders' identity value.